Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson of North Carolina, the Republican nominee for governor who has a history of making inflammatory remarks, once called himself a black Nazi on a pornographic messaging board. Now, CNN is reporting these details out today, and shortly before the report, Robinson issued a video statement vowing to stay in the race and denying having made the statements. Well, he had to issue that video because Republicans in North Carolina have been calling on him to resign. They knew that a story was coming, and they knew that the story would be bad. I don't think anyone knew it would be this bad, and would include Mark Robinson defending slavery and being registered on Ashley Madison, a site where married people go to meet others to have affairs. And the group that urged Democratic primary voters to cast uncommitted primary ballots in protest of the Biden administration's support of Israel's war in Gaza announced that it would not endorse Kamala Harris, saying she had not responded to its request for her to meet with Palestinian Americans who had lost their loved ones or for a meeting about stopping arms shipments to Israel. But the same group urged its supporters to vote against Donald Trump, saying he had bragged about accelerating the genocide against Palestinians. And they said they've also encouraged their voters or their supporters not to vote for any third-party candidates because such a vote would benefit Donald Trump. And a wave of local and regional Teamsters in battleground states have rushed to endorse Vice President Harris after the National Teamsters Union declared it would not endorse a presidential candidate. And this is the first time they've not issued an endorsement in nearly 3 decades. Teamsters representing members in Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Western Pennsylvania endorsed Harris after Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters, said yesterday that the union was withholding this endorsement because, according to him, neither candidate was able to make serious commitments to our union. Now, 500,000 Teamsters disagree with O'Brien because they say Kamala Harris is the only candidate that supports unions. And Vice President Harris is in the battleground state of Michigan tonight, where she is scheduled to be joined by Oprah Winfrey and Governor Gretchen Whitmer for a live-streamed event called Unite for America. It's aimed to register voters and to provide support for the VP and her running mate. It's expected that maybe close to 1 million people will join in on this virtual rally involving the VP, Oprah Winfrey, and Gretchen Whitmer. And 4 years later, the tobacco industry is banking on Donald Trump's chaotic approach to public health and his pliable views on all kinds of health policies. Now, this is as these tobacco companies are facing new challenges to their bottom line because Joe Biden has been considering a ban on menthol cigarettes, which represents some 36% of the cigarette market. So you can see why Donald Trump is the candidate for big tobacco industry executives. This is the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go a little deeper, where we dig behind those headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. Well, there were 2 jaw-dropping reports issued this week about Black women's health, and I would have been remiss as a Black woman, as an advocate, not to cover these stories on this show this week. One of them has to do with pregnant women, women giving birth who are being taken advantage of, according to one report, by hospitals who are being given unnecessary C-sections, being given more C-sections than their white women counterparts, even though they have similar medical histories. The other report is about Black women and breast cancer, saying that Black women and white women get breast cancer at the same rate, but Black women 40% more likely to die of breast cancer than white women. Why are Black women at such risk at giving birth and when it comes to breast cancer? Well, to answer these questions and to talk about what's going on with Black women and our health, I have Janet Curie. She is a Henry Putman Professor of Economics and Public Affairs at Princeton University. She's also the co-director of the Center for Health and Well-Being. That's also a institute at Princeton University. Also joining us is Dr. Ijawa. Dr. Ijawa is a Akwandu. I'm sorry, I'm missing your last name here. My notes are a little jumbled. Excuse me, doctor. But she is a practicing OBGYN, and she's a co-founder of the Birth Squad. This is an organization committed to empowering women to have safe, equitable, and transformative birth experiences. Both of these women are experts in the area of Black women's health, and particularly around Black birthing women. And it's so important that we talk about these stories on programs like this, because all of us have mothers and sisters and daughters and nieces. We know women who are likely to give birth. We know women who are likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer. And sometimes the information that comes at us is so confusing, so overwhelming. It's hard to make sense of it. You see these big reports that come out in the news, and you don't know, does this apply to me? What does this mean in terms of my healthcare? When I go to my doctor, I feel like I have 30 seconds at best to talk about my issues. And so a lot of women, a lot of people, but today we're talking about women, feel lost. They don't feel like they have anywhere to go to get reliable information. And my goal on Areva Martin in Real Time is to be your trusted messenger, to make sure we are talking about those stories that folks are talking about around their kitchen tables, stories that resonate with our viewers, and stories that bring you an opportunity to hear from the most credible experts and professionals who are attached to these stories. So both of my guests today were quoted in a New York Times article that really talked about this report around unnecessary C-section. So I'm really excited to be joined by them to get more information for you and for me included, because I have two daughters, about C-sections and about Black women and our higher rates of death from breast cancer. When we come forward, we're going to be breaking it all down for you on Black women and our health right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in Real Time on KBLA Talk 1580. Tabitha Smiley's new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, is now on sale everywhere. This classic text shot to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list almost 2 decades ago. If you have the original book, you will surely want to get this 20th anniversary edition with powerful new contributions from today's leading voices. This 20th anniversary edition presents a compelling blend of historical insights and contemporary urgency in this critical and unprecedented election year. Get your copy of The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later today.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it, yeah, roll it, yeah, drop it.
Okay.
Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Okay, everyone, what did you think of the chocolate bar?
It's too chewy.
Feels kind of chalky.
Too much nougat.
I need to go brush my teeth.
Business is booming for Steph's small marketing research firm.
After all these focus groups, there's only one conclusion. I need more researchers.
And she's way too busy researching
Does this have peanuts?
to waste time researching resumes.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Put our matching platform to work so you can spend less time searching and more time connecting with talented candidates. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles is a nonprofit law firm that protects and advances the rights of the most underserved, leveling the playing field and ensuring that everyone can have access to the justice system. Every year, LAFLA provides free, high-quality legal services to more than 100,000 people living in poverty across greater Los Angeles. Their unique combination of neighborhood offices, self-help centers at courthouses, services and domestic violence clinics puts Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles on the front lines in vulnerable communities and at the forefront of change. LAFLA's expert team of attorneys, paralegals, and support staff works to provide direct representation, offer counsel and advice, provide referrals, and educate the community about their legal rights through workshops and seminars. With locations all over LA, you can access their services or volunteer to help no matter where you live. And if you have an urgent issue, call 213-235-0060. That's 213-235-0060. To get legal help, make a donation, or volunteer, visit lafla.org. lafla.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We're back, and Dr. Ijama Okwandu, a practicing physician in Atlanta and also the co-founder of the Birth Squad, is joining us. And also Professor Janet Curry is here. She's a professor of economics and public affairs at Princeton, and she's the director of the Center for Health and Well-Being at that university. Let's start with you, Professor Curry. You are the co-author of this report that came out in the New York Times this week, talking about the unnecessary C-sections that Black women have at a variety of hospitals. I think you looked at 68 hospitals in New Jersey, and this is, according to the New York Times, one of the largest studies to tackle this issue of Black women and cesarean sections. So start by just telling what prompted you to do this study.
So we knew already that from a lot of different studies going back to 1995, that Black women have higher rates of C-section than white women. And if you talk to people about that, they will give you all kinds of reasons why that might be the case. You know, saying, well, Black women maybe have more risk factors, have different insurance, go to different hospitals on average. And so, you know, those might explain some of this difference. People even say, well, maybe people want to have a C-section. There's always that argument that women are demanding to have C-sections. So we decided to try and unpeel the layers of this onion and start with the idea that people might want C-sections. And we thought, okay, well, the people who want C-sections are going to schedule them in advance. So we'll just look at unscheduled deliveries. And there we still saw that there was a very big difference. So the Black women were 25% more likely to have C-sections. And in the data we have, which is from hospital records, we could control for risk factors. We used a machine learning algorithm to try and predict people's risk. And what we saw was that almost all of the disparity was accounted for by low-risk women. Which makes sense if you think about it. If somebody really needs a C-section, apparently they will get it regardless of race. So the extra C-sections were for women who basically had no risk factors. And then to try and see a little bit more what was going on, we looked at whether essentially the labor and delivery room for C-sections was busy or not. And what we saw was that if it was in use because somebody else was there with a scheduled C-section, then there was no gap. So this gap only happened when the facility was empty and there was a Black woman, you know, with an unscheduled delivery sort of available. So what we concluded from this was that a lot of these C-sections were unnecessary. And then we could even go a little further than that and say, well, what happened to the moms? And we could follow them in the hospital data to see if they came back with complications. And the Black women who had these unnecessary C-sections were more likely to come back with complications about the surgical wound, which makes sense, because if you have a surgery, there's always a risk of having an infection or having the wound come apart or something like that.
So, Dr. Aquando, does this study and the findings in this study, did it surprise you at all? Because when you read the study, I guess what you have to conclude is that these hospitals are using Black women as experiments, as guinea pigs, as cash, uh, you know, cash cows of sorts. They're using them to do these surgeries because they can bill the insurance companies. Presumably, I mean, I don't know what else are to conclude from this study.
The study did not surprise me with these outcomes. The C-sections are the most common surgery that is done in the United States on women. And so of the 4 million deliveries, 1 in 3 will be delivered by C-section. But even though it's so common, it is not without risk. There's risk of hemorrhage, infection, surgical complications, and really about also implies family planning goals as well, because we know that if someone's had a C-section before, they're more likely to have one as well. And let's not forget about the social impact that it can have on these women who have stress and trauma associated with negative birth outcomes and experiences. I did a similar study that also found these racial disparities existed. Black women were almost 1.5 times more likely to have a C-section than their white counterparts in my study as well. And what I find to be the most important thing to think about is that there's so many different factors that can lead to why these outcomes were also seen in this study. But really what we're seeing is that it's a reflection of the systemic, institutional disparities that we see in our country. What happens in the labor and delivery room is not just what's happening that day. It's a summation of this individual's interactions with the system, the healthcare system, and what Black people face in America. So the C-section disparity, I think, is just a reflection of socioeconomic and racial disparities in the context of the United States. And do I think it's, just about the money? I think what this, the study might reflect is, again, just a proxy of the disparities that we see in our country.
I hear you when you say disparities, but like, why? Why go into a labor and delivery room? Why go into a hospital room with a Black woman and say, oh, we have a surgery room that's available. We think you should have a C-section. I'm simplifying how this happens, but if you say it's not about the money, what else? Is it the convenience of the doctor? There has to be something that's motivating them to choose Black women for these unnecessary surgeries.
Right. You bring up a really good point. I think one thing at an individual level, at the hospital level, there are multiple factors. It's nuanced, right? It could be a logistical thing. It could be the availability of an OR staff not able to run a second room. It could also be about how many other people are in labor and delivery. What's the risk factors of the patients on there? What is the staff level as well? In my study particularly, I found that Black women were more likely to have a C-section for something called fetal distress, which is really a more subjective indication when you're thinking about indications for C-section. It's really based on interpretation. Two people can be looking at the same strip and come to a different decision about whether to do a C-section or not. So, for one, like you mentioned, it really could be provider discretion. There's also the known data that Black women have a higher related morbidity and mortality. So could knowing this information make providers subconsciously have a lower threshold to diagnose these more nuanced things and then recommend a C-section for a Black woman because they're trying to avoid that associated risk? And really,
But are you saying that somehow by giving birth by C-section is safer than vaginal delivery?
Well, there's two sides to this argument, right? For one, it could be seen that C-section is overused and because of the perceived stress on that baby in labor. But on the other hand, it could be argued that the C-section, quote unquote, was done in time, and that's why we're not seeing the poor neonatal outcomes.
But I guess I'm still struggling because and I understand that this is nuanced and Professor Curry, maybe you can jump in here since you are the co-author of this story, the story that was in the New York Times. You're the co-author of the report, not the story, but the report that was reported on in the New York Times. What were some of the reasons? If it's not just money, if it's not just convenience, I mean, are there any, top three, or something that you were able to trace and see some consistency with regards to why these procedures were taking place?
Okay, so the why is something that we can't really say for sure because we just see what happened. So we're not asking people, why they did something. But I do think it could be, fear of bad outcomes if people think that Black women are more likely to have a bad outcome. But I think it could be something as simple as, who has the power in that kind of a situation to push back or to ask questions. I think for almost any medical thing, if you're there having a procedure, you want somebody there who can advocate for you, who will just ask questions like, well, why are we doing this?
Let me stop you for a second. That's the patient pushing back saying, I don't want it. I'm trying to get closer to why is someone walking into these hospital rooms even suggesting it in the first place? Yeah. And I know you said you don't know necessarily the reason for that.
One doctor gave me the following scenario. He said, well, at his hospital, a woman might come in, say, in the evening and be induced and then labor for, say, 12 hours. Suppose it's 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm tired, I want to go home. And I know that the OR is going to be busy at 8 o'clock because that's when the scheduled C-sections are coming in. So I have a window between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. when I can just do the C-section, get it done. And so, I might go to the mother and say, it's time to get that baby out or something like that. And then she has a C-section, right? And I guess the question to ask is like, well, would there be any harm in laboring longer? But after you've been in labor for 12 hours, maybe you're not really up to have that discussion.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If that doctor went into the room and there was a white woman in there rather than a Black woman, would he ask her the same question? Well, you've been in labor for 12 hours. I have this window of 2 hours to do this surgery. I suggest we do a C-section. Would he do the same thing?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think that if it's sort of a marginal thing, maybe you would ask people where you think that they're not going to put up much of a fuss. There's an interesting study, which is mostly white women in the study, where some of the women are physicians themselves, and they are much less likely to get C-sections if they're low risk than other women in the same hospitals. And the idea there is that it's sort of almost a professional courtesy that, oh, you're a doctor, so I'm not going to do this unnecessary surgery on you. Or maybe it's that the doctors know better, like that this isn't really necessary. So that's just another example in a different context.
And in your study, I know you said that sometimes it's a question of who feels empowered to push back. Did your study include talking to women who had these C-sections? And was that something that they noted, is that they felt compelled to do it even though they may not have had that planned?
Yeah, so one thing about this study, it's using hospital records. Those are all anonymized when we look at them. So I don't know, hopefully that makes your viewers feel better about me looking at these kind of data. But every time somebody goes to the hospital, there's a record generated because states regulate hospitals. And then looking at that, we looked at 1 million different deliveries. So we really had a lot of information. But then on the flip side of that, we don't know exactly who those people are, and we're not supposed to go and contact them.
So we don't know if women were pushing back, what information they may have had, how empowered they may have felt or not felt in these situations. When we come forward, I want to talk about, what do we do now that we have this information? I'm always curious about these studies. I see them all the time. They're alarming, oftentimes when it involves Black women, particularly around our health. And then I feel like, the story's out there. There's some publicity around it, and then it kind of goes into a dark, deep hole. No one ever finds out what the outcomes are, or were there any policy changes or any, changes at a granular level as a result of this study being done. So when we come forward, I do want to talk about that, like what changes have happened or possibly you would like to see happen as a result now of having this study. And then this just startling report out about Black women and deaths related to breast cancer. Again, just shocking in terms of the racial disparities, the implicit bias, and the other things that impact Black women and our health. When we come forward, more of KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. New Jersey-based Ocean First Bank has agreed to pay $15 million to resolve charges of discrimination by redlining at least 3 communities of color in the Garden State. Redlining is an illegal practice in which insurance companies and lenders avoid providing credit services in communities of color. Since 2021, the Justice Department has announced 13 redlining cases that have been resolved, and more than $137 million have been secured in communities of color. A new study out of Boston shows that Black women are much more likely than white women to die of breast cancer. Researchers at Mass General Hospital found that Black women are 40% more likely than Caucasian women to succumb to breast cancer, including the most treatable types. After analyzing 18 studies involving 230,000 patients, Black and white, they've concluded that it's not biology that's driving that statistic. It's racial disparities, such as the cost of hormonal therapy that must be taken for 5 years or more. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
Over in Elysian Park, a brush fire is on the right shoulder of the 110 North before Stadium Way with a 30-minute stop delay from Vernon. Drive carefully back in Lincoln Heights as stop traffic from Ditman continues, as the center lane is still blocked with a stall on the 5 North before Mission Road. Mid-City has a 35-minute backup running heavy on the 5-101 interchange on the 10 West before La Brea Avenue due to an accident on the right shoulder. And in Anaheim, a stall has been cleared from the 5 North off-ramp to the Brookhurst Street, La Palma Avenue split with slowing in recovery from Euclid.
Compassion sponsorship means food, healthcare, education, and more for a child in poverty. And there are thousands of kids who've been waiting over a year. End their wait. Sponsor a child with compassion today. Text the word radio to 83393.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
A very painful season for the LA Sparks comes to an end tonight with their final game in Minnesota. The Sparks, 7-32, will finish with the most losses in a single season in WNBA history, and they will miss the playoffs for the 4th straight year. Magic Johnson, one of the Sparks' 6 owners, is not happy with the status of his team. He's promising to get more involved in team operations in the offseason, including the push to build the Sparks a practice facility, something the team does not have. The Sparks have been training at El Camino College in Torrance. Not having their own practice facility has become a major issue for the Sparks. Johnson said this situation will be addressed before next season. He also plans to evaluate the role of Coach Kurt Miller in 2 seasons with the Sparks. Miller is 24-56 heading into tonight's season finale. When Magic promises changes, things tend to happen. Stay tuned. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Yeah, y'all, come on. Pick up the drums.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we fight the power every day.
Yeah, gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey.
I listen to KBLA and I love the commercials. I know what the commercials mean. I also, if I'm looking and trying to figure something out, I need something to talk to me that might hit me. And it happens on TV because, every time they show a sporting event, they got the pharmaceutical companies back to back telling people how to fix the sickness on the same stuff that they sell them. So we get it.
Yep, we get it too, Chuck B. And that's why at KBLA Talk 1580, we don't black down.
Drop it. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. Fight the power.
Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. By any other name, we demand environmental justice in 2024 and beyond. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down.
you have asthma, you know that there are certain things that can set off your asthma symptoms. These things are called triggers, and patients with severe asthma have an average of 8 triggers. It could be pollen, dust, pollution, colds, viruses, smoke, or stress. If you know your symptoms, you have already taken the first step to managing your asthma. The next step is to write your triggers down in a notebook or journal and record your symptoms when you come across those triggers. This will give your healthcare provider valuable information about what you can do to help manage your triggers. By understanding your triggers and writing them down, you are on your way to taking back control of your lung health. Visit luma-edu.com for more guidance. This message is brought to you by Amgen and AstraZeneca.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We're back, and I'm talking with Dr. Ijama Okwandu and Professor Janet Curry about this new study out that says that Black women in particular are more likely to have a C-section when giving birth than their white counterparts. Also, there's a study out this week that said Black women are more likely than white women to die of all types of breast cancer. This study says that the findings highlight how racial disparities rather than biology are driving the differences in death rates between Black and white women. So, Dr. Okwandu, I follow these stories religiously. I often will do a whole show when these studies come out, but I always wonder what happens, because it doesn't seem like from the last study done to say that, there are health disparities with regards to Black women in birth or Black women, in cancer and other chronic disease. Is anything happening to change the trajectory or to change the outcomes for Black women? Or are we just reporting on all of these disparities?
Right. I think that's a great question. Yes, the disparities exist. We acknowledge them. But what is important, and some things that have happened so far, is looking systemically in the way that race affects healthcare decisions. For example, just recently, in the last few years, the VBAC, or the trial of labor calculator that's used to assess the success of a woman to have a vaginal delivery after a C-section, was changed. In the past, it included race and being Black specifically as a negative factor to a woman's success to have a vaginal delivery after C-section. So obviously that can affect the ways in which a provider is counseling a woman about her success of a vaginal delivery, and also really impacts the way the decisions that woman makes. I think the other thing that should definitely be addressed when talking about healthcare disparities is the diversity in medicine. Black physicians are really underrepresented in medicine. They only make up 6% of the physicians in the United States. And we know that there are studies that have shown that racial concordance actually improves outcomes for Black people. They feel heard. They feel like their concerns are addressed. There is cultural sensitivity and more effective communication. Going into that as well is implicit bias training and improvement of communication skills among providers. Because as Janet Curry mentioned earlier, some groups may feel more empowered or more inclined to ask for alternative strategies before proceeding to a C-section than someone else. And that's exactly why I created the Birth Squad, actually. It is a podcast and educational platform that really empowers and equips women with the tools and resources needed to navigate the healthcare system more confidently. Having knowledge is power. My goal is always for women to be armed with the knowledge so that they can ask the questions that need to be asked and really be able to be a huge part of the healthcare decisions about their health and the health of their babies. And finally, I think another thing that could really help address these issues are doulas. Doulas are known to decrease C-section rates, they decrease complications, they decrease the risk of postpartum depression, and most importantly, women are more satisfied with their birth experiences. So, federal funding for doulas for women in their birth, I think should be a priority of this country as well.
So, and I hear you. We've had doulas on the show before. We've had birth advocates on that talk about the importance of doulas and how cities across this country are making doulas more available, whether it's through healthcare insurance or whether it's through sponsored programs through counties, like Los Angeles County has a doula program. But everybody's not going to be fortunate enough, Professor Curry, to have a doula, and many insurance companies, I'm not sure any, but we know there are definitely some that do not cover that cost. So what can we hope from this study that would change the way the doctors who are providing the healthcare provide the healthcare? Because also some of the birth advocates I've had on have advocated using birthing centers, not going to hospitals, having births at home in alternative locations. And all that's fine for those people that have the luxury of one, finding out about those alternatives, and two, being able to avail themselves of it. But the majority of women, Black women in particular, are going to find themselves in a hospital in their community having their babies. So while creating alternatives, I think, is great, and we can obviously do two things at the same time, how do we fix our healthcare system where these women are going to deliver babies?
Yeah, that's a tough question, especially given the small numbers of Black doctors, and the long pipeline to become a doctor and become an OBGYN. Even under the best case scenario, it will take a long time to have more Black doctors. We did look actually in our study about whether if you had a Black doctor and you're a Black woman, you're less likely to get an unnecessary C-section. And we did see a difference there. So that's an important point. With the doulas, the way that I think about it is in terms of what I was saying before, that you need an advocate for you in the hospital. That's one of the things that a doula is. She's seen a lot of births. She knows what's what. She's working for you, right? She's your advocate. So I think just having somebody there who's very informed, who's a witness to what happens, could be very useful. I know some states are starting to pay for doulas under their Medicaid programs, which would make them more accessible. And so I think that's a positive thing.
But let me ask you this. So we're going to have the same issue with doulas as we have with doctors. Do you see, Dr. Okwandu, the doulas that you work with, are there large number of Black doulas, or are women going to be forced to use white doulas? And not to say that a white doula can't be effective, but might you have the same issue with a doula that doesn't have that racial sensitivity for whatever reason?
In my experience, I will say that there is usually racial concordance between doulas and patients. But I think the important thing also to know is that embedded within the doula training is advocacy, as Ms. Curry mentioned. So I think, regardless of race, I think the main goal of the doula is to stand in the gap as an advocate for the patient first, and to just bridge that communication between the patient and the provider.
I think it's also important to keep in mind the role of health insurance. So even with the disparity in cancer deaths, my understanding is that it's less in states that expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, which speaks to the really important role of having good health insurance to make sure that you can get access to the treatments that you need and continue those treatments for the length of time that they're needed.
Yeah, these report that came out about breast cancer, some shocking findings have to do with the fact that for years it was thought that Black women, that there was some biology involved in why Black women had a particular type of breast cancer more often than white women. And one of the issues they point to in this study is the lack of Black women that participate in clinical trials and not having the benefit of Black women in these studies so that they can learn more about the biology of certain kinds of cancer. But it's quite shocking to learn that Black women and white women get cancer at about the same rate, but that you're 40%, there's a 40% greater chance of dying from cancer, breast cancer, particularly if you're a Black woman. And the issue is, again, not biology, according to this study, it's racial disparities. And again, we've come a long way in this country around addressing racial bias, implicit bias, and discrimination, but clearly so much further to go and so much more work that needs to be done to make sure women's lives are not at risk. When we come forward, more on Black women and our health right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
October 2nd is California Clean Air Day. Go Metro for free and help cut down on pollution and traffic. It's our way of thanking you because every ride makes a difference. Let's clear the air together. Ready to go right now? Head to metro.net.
That morning chill means truck season.
5 more minutes.
No snoozing. Do it all in a Chevy Colorado or Silverado, including the class-leading range of the Silverado EV.
Talking to me?
Work, play, hauling, off-roading, a Chevy truck can take it all.
Okay, I'm up.
Get 1.9% financing on all 2024 Silverado 1500 and Colorado pickups when you finance with GM Financial Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
1.9% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $28.60 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 24.5%. Plus finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available to lease in some of the offers. Take new retail delivery by 9/30/24.
Hi, this is Councilman Curran Price, inviting you to be part of our city's legendary musical history at the 29th Annual Central Avenue Jazz Festival on September the 21st from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. For decades, the Central Avenue Jazz Festival has honored this historic corridor's unparalleled contribution to jazz. Enjoy a day filled with jazz, blues, and Latin jazz across 3 stages, featuring performances by Chief Ajua, the John Beasley Big Band, and Las Chicas. Indulge in a variety of delicious foods from barbecue to Asian fusion, and explore from a unique mix of vendors and more. The festival is free to attend, and it takes place on Central Avenue between King Boulevard and Vernon Avenue. Parking is limited, so Metro and rideshare are recommended. For more information, visit centralavejazzfest.com. That's centralavejazzfest.com. See you on the 21st.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, Black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
We're back, and Professor Janet Curry is here. She's a professor of economics and public affairs at Princeton University. She's also the director of the Center for Health and Well-Being at Princeton. And Dr. Ijama Okwandu is here. She's a practicing OBGYN in Atlanta, Georgia. And she's a co-founder of the Birth Squad, an organization committed to empowering women to have safe, equitable, and transformative birth experiences. So, Dr. Okwando, in the last 5 years, what major shifts, if any, have you seen that are helping to improve some of the outcomes that Black women have when giving birth?
So I would say some of the things that have improved, I think, is at the community level. There are so many advocacy groups, alliances that are really acknowledging the effect that it has on our community and addressing that head on. And I think that at the end of the day, if we keep bringing awareness to this, what I call a public health issue, keep shining light on this is the first step to making systemic change.
And when you say at the community level, what do you mean? These organizations that you're doing this narrative storytelling, that are out talking about real life experiences, both positive and negative, involving birthing by Black women?
Yeah, so it's in addition to sharing the narrative, bringing attention to this, it also is, these communities are creating resources for women, such as scholarships for doulas, creating doula trainings, having conferences talking about these issues, funding for midwifery training, pairing women with doulas. All of these things do have an impact to improve individuals' experiences and, as a whole group.
And what do you expect to see, Professor Curry, from healthcare providers when they get these kinds of studies? Is it the expectation or goal that they take this data and they, translate it into some policy at the hospital level?
Well, I guess what I hope that they don't do is say, oh, we just need to lower C-sections in Black women, because that isn't necessarily what you want to do, right? You want the women who really need a C-section to still get one. You just want them to not be doing them on people who don't need them, because it can be a life-saving surgery. So you want whatever policy is put into effect to be a thoughtful one that's looking at the low-risk people. I know some hospital systems have put into place measures where if somebody wants to do a C-section on somebody who has no risk factors, then somebody else has to approve it. And just the fact that they have to sort of tell somebody else what they're doing causes the rate to go down. So that is kind of a mild policy that could go into effect that would probably have an effect on unnecessary C-sections.
So, Dr. Okwandu, you are practicing OBGYN. You see women who are giving birth. What advice would I'm sorry, Dr. Okwandu. I was asking you, you are a practicing doctor, so you see women giving birth. You see the stress that they're under as they're trying to make decisions, as doctors may be coming into the labor and delivery room telling them, you've been in labor for 10 or 12 hours, you need to do something. What do you advise women to do?
I advise them to ask questions. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. And if you don't understand, ask again. I think the most one of the critical parts of, such a high intensity situation such as labor and delivery is the communication that is occurring with the healthcare team and the patient. And even prior to getting to the point of delivery, asking those questions again in the clinic, really finding a provider that you can actually connect to and trust. And if you're finding that you're not getting the right answers or not understanding in a way that is conducive for you, find a second opinion, find someone that you connect to, because I think that connection and trust and communication are cornerstones to health outcomes as well.
So I hear you. And as a person that's given birth 3 times, vaginal births, never a C-section, I'm thinking of the pain that you are in as you're getting ready to give birth. I cannot imagine being my best advocate in that situation and knowing what questions to ask, or even how to, discern the information that's being provided. So if the onus is on the patient that's in the middle of this birth experience, to ask these intelligent questions and then to be able to, ferret what has been said and to make a good decision, I feel like that's a little, those expectations are too high. And I don't imagine that most birthing people could, pull that off in the midst of being in labor.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And again, I talked about doulas previously, and I really do feel that doulas are a key answer to bridging that gap, to helping women in these really high intense situations, to help them make these decisions and really make sure that they're being heard, that their priorities are being valued. And if one can't afford a doula, as we mentioned previously, family or a support person, I think, is so important. Being alone in that situation, I think, is, it's sad actually, because it's just such a sensitive time. A lot of times women in labor, this is the first time they've ever been in the hospital, the first time they've had an IV, spending days and confined into the walls of a hospital. So that in of itself is an unfamiliar situation. And then adding on having to make such crucial medical decisions. And again, this is where we insert the birth squad too, right? Education before actually getting to that point. I want women to know about every single topic that might arise in the labor situation. And at least, even though they may not know everything about it, at least they've heard about it from us. And they've had not just a story about it from a real woman who went through it, but also the medical context of that topic.
Yeah, I love the concept of a doula. I just, again, know that there is not universal doula care available right now, that many of the women I know who have access to doulas are middle class or affluent women. Although, like I said, there are programs through the County of Los Angeles and some other counties to make doula care available to all women, regardless of your socioeconomics. But it is a concept that has not, again, been widespread, has been used or adopted by all of the hospitals and medical facilities where people are likely to give birth. So clearly, if you live in a city or state where you can access doula care, I think everyone on this program today would encourage you to seek that kind of care out. But for those women who don't have access, either because it's not available through your health insurance or not available through your county health services, and you don't have the financial wherewithal to hire someone, because these people do cost money. These are trained professionals that do cost you money to use their services. We've just got to do better as a nation. We have to do better as a healthcare system, because the expectations, I think, that women are going to be able to, navigate these very perilous situations is unrealistic. And we're going to continue to see women, particularly women of color, disadvantaged in this system until we have more universal doula care, which we know some states aren't even expanding Medicare. I'm sorry, not Medicare, Medicaid, or state of California, Medi-Cal, to provide postpartum care and some other kinds of really critical care that birthing mothers need. So we've got a lot of advocacy to do. Thank you, Dr. Oquanda, for what you do at the Birth Squad. As you said, not just telling stories about women and their birthing experiences, but also putting it in the proper medical context and giving women that kind of information that can help them be more informed. Professor Curry, I hope that your study gets broadly circulated to hospitals, not just on the East Coast, but throughout the country, and that we do start to see some kind of policy changes that, as you said, aren't just kind of knee-jerk reactions, like no more C-sections, but really takes a thoughtful approach to when are these surgeries needed, not just for the benefit or convenience of the doctor that wants to go home, or for, padding the bills of hospitals because their surgery rooms are empty, and all the other nefarious reasons why these surgeries may be taking place. But thanks to both of you for, lifting up this topic, for sharing such great information on helping educate my viewers and listeners on their health, because we know our health is our wealth in this country, and we have to make sure we are our own best advocates when it comes to protecting our health. When we come forward, Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here in KBLA Talk 1580. We are out of time, but you can continue to follow this conversation and all of my conversations by following me on all social media platforms at Areva Martin, and checking out the Areva Martin podcast if you want more information about this topic and others. Stay with us.